Hey, everybody, welcome to True Crime Paranormal. I'm Kristi Brower here with my partner in crime, Katie Weaver. Hey, Katie.
Hello.
We're excited to be bringing you our weekly regular episode about, something true crime and something paranormal. And it's both today, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I'm loving it.
But as is our custom, let's do a quick check-in. So, Katie, how are you doing?
I am a hot mess.
Oh, do
Well,
tell.
as we were talking about, most of you probably heard us talk about, we were vendors at a witch's market yesterday with lots of things that we make and sell, and it
Yeah,
was great. We had a super good day. Um,
you did.
but I have worked so hard the last couple of weeks to make sure I had all of my product ready that you guys would just be horrified by my house, really. Luckily, I pay a cleaning lady, and she's helped us out quite a bit. But I hate this place right now. So tomorrow, I really have to get my act together. But anyway, I'm truly fine. Just a little astonished at this moment, and pretty shocked at the state of my fridge. I'm really, really going to have to buy groceries. We've had a spoonful of peanut butter for dinner a little too often recently. So,
I don't think that counts as dinner.
I
Just gonna put
know.
that out there.
It'll get to be like 11:30 and somebody's like, "Were we gonna cook dinner?" God. Well, who has time for that now? So,
Right.
anyway, it's just how you just kind of get to that point that you go, I've got to declutter, reset, like get it together. And
Yeah.
that's where I am. So, I'm
Very
actually truly fine. I've just got to get my shit together. That's all.
good.
So,
Well,
that's tomorrow's goal. At least maybe I can get like half of it together or something.
well, there you go. I hope you
Well,
can.
my kid is on Spud Harvest. So most of you guys
Yes.
have no idea what Spud Harvest is. I
Right.
learned
No.
this by doing radio, over the years that this was a concept to me that's no big shocker.
Yeah.
But
We grew up with it all our lives.
yeah, unless you live around Idaho, you don't know, but you've heard of the Idaho potato, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
So if y'all want to be able to have your Lay's potato chips or go into Big Guys and have your fries and so on and so forth, the potato harvest takes a huge chunk of people and time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a short window in which the farmers can bring the potatoes in. And
Yeah.
especially this year because it got cold pretty quick, it'll be an interesting harvest, I think. But
Mhm.
anyway, so what's going to happen right now is that most of the schools will close for a week or two. Our whole school district is closed for like 18 days
Yeah.
because so many teachers and so many kids from like junior high up through high school work in potatoes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so we're on Spud Harvest, and my kid is not working in potatoes, so she doesn't know it yet, but she'll be helping me get my shit together. So
Well, good.
there you go. Yeah. We worked
Yeah.
in potatoes for years and years
We
when we were
sure
kids.
did. Yeah. It is a dirty,
Mm.
cold, hard freaking job. I'm glad I don't have to do it
And
anymore.
our job, the two of us, and our other sister and a couple of our friends, would ride on the combine. So the combine is this big piece of equipment that these big tractors pull through the field, and all of the potatoes come past you as they're dug out of the field on a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And our job was to pick rocks out of the off the conveyor belt as fast as we could, rocks or debris, dead animals that sometimes
Yeah.
came
Dead
through.
birds. Oh.
We would get
Oh.
in trouble because we'd let dead animals go into the cellar because so they would, because we didn't want to touch them. But
Yeah.
what would
We'd all be
happen is,
fighting over who had to touch it, and before you knew it, it was in the
yeah,
truck before we
in the
could do
truck.
anything about it.
Well, or one of our gloves that got torn off it's a dangerous job. So you
Mhm.
glove that ended up in the cellar because it got ripped off. Luckily, it wasn't your finger.
Yeah.
But we'd stand out on that combine day in and day out in the rain and the sleet and snow or sun or, this time of
Mhm.
year in Idaho, you a lot of times get all four seasons in one day.
Oh,
But,
yeah, definitely.
and we were thrilled to do it because we came out of it with a chunk of change. We made some money, so we loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was worth it back in the day, but I'm glad I don't have to
Mhm.
do it anymore.
We would have competitions to see who could find the biggest potato.
Yeah.
And you'd pull that off and hang on to it and go home and bake it and bring it back the next day for your lunch.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was, we're easily entertained here in the great state of Idaho, I think.
Apparently, we are. So, yay, it's Spud Harvest.
Yay. Well, I'm good. I'm going through some really big changes in my life and some
Yeah.
directional changes. I was laid off from my job, which was a kind of expected, kind of unexpected situation. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to be doing some different stuff, which is exciting. I think actually I will have more time to put into this podcast, which I'm
Yeah.
excited about. So I'm
Well, that
going to
part
see some
doesn't
new
stop.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen you land on your feet a great many times, so I know that you
Yes,
will,
I will.
and that, exciting things will be coming. So,
Yeah.
you know,
I think so. I'm excited and I'm feeling this space in my head of like all the room that I've it's been taken up by my duties at my job that I
yeah,
can use for other stuff. And
yeah,
and that's actually the start of that was the idea for tonight's show.
yeah,
So
yeah,
today, whenever you're listening to this, we're
yeah.
recording it at night, obviously. We want to talk about children who experience past life memories, and some
Mhm,
of whom have actually solved their own murder in a previous life, who have, identified as being someone identifiable. Just think it's very interesting, this concept of, maybe this isn't the only Katie, you and I
mhm,
have both had some past life memory experiences in our own
mhm,
lives,
mhm.
but I
With
think it's
ourselves
pretty
and our
interesting.
kids.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I just think that there's some pretty interesting stories out there because some of them children actually were able to solve their murder from the life prior to this one.
yeah,
So we're
yeah.
going to tell you some stories tonight, talk about it. Of course, if you're listening on a platform where you can comment back to us, please do. We love to hear what people have to say and,
Mhm,
what your thoughts are on this. Not everybody believes in reincarnation. That's okay. But there's something very interesting going on here. And it's
mhm.
something that's been going on for a long time. It's quite well
Yeah.
documented.
Well, and you and I professionally have worked
Lots.
in past life regression as past life regressionists for
Yeah.
15 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have a lot of experience in this field.
We
Yeah.
do. So certainly have experienced a lot ourselves, plus seen
Mhm,
our clients experience a lot.
mhm.
But I thought it'd be fun to tie it into true crime and maybe tell a couple of
Yeah.
stories out there that about children who actually solved their own murders from their prior life.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you the first one. This is a really famous one. This is about a little boy, a little Israeli child who lived near Syria. And this story was told to a man named Dr. Eli Lash. And Eli Lash was a physician in Israel who did a lot of research about past lives and children's past life experiences. So he investigated a case where this young boy, and they don't use any names, but this little boy who was about 3 started reporting that he remembered a previous life in which he was murdered by being hit in the head with an axe.
Mhm.
And he did actually have a red birthmark on his head that may have indicated where he had been hit with the axe. Now, his parents were Druze, and the Druze people believe in reincarnation. So this was not
Mhm.
a surprising thing for him, growing up. But even at 3, I mean, he was really little to have
Yeah.
these things, to have these kinds of memories.
Oh, yeah.
But there were his family and some of the elders in their village decided that they were going to try to figure out if this story was true after he started talking about it and telling it. And so he said that he lived in a different village from the village that they lived in. So they
Mhm.
started taking him around to neighboring villages to see if he recognized any place. And the third village that they went to, um, he knew that place. He identified the names of several people from his past lifetime there who lived there in that village, and he also knew the first and last name of himself in that incarnation, and the first and last name of the man who murdered him,
Yeah.
who was a person who was still living in this community.
Mhm.
So the
Who
the
had been his
man,
next door neighbor,
yeah,
right?
yeah, his next door neighbor.
Yeah.
So the man that he claimed to be had been missing for 4 years.
Yeah.
And it would just was kind of assumed that he'd been killed, but nobody really knew. But you got to remember this is kind of on the border between Israel and Syria, and
Mhm.
people were often disappeared in that place.
Mhm.
So they go through the village, and so the boy is able to point out the house where he used to live. He gives his name. It gives all this information that people in the community can verify, but they have no idea how this 3-year-old child knows any of this.
Mhm.
So people in the village kind of start gathering, trying to figure out what's going on here. And the boy walks right up to this man and calls him by his name.
Mhm.
And the man did say that, yes, that in fact was his name. And so the little boy says to this man, I used to be your neighbor. We had a fight and you killed me with an axe. And Dr. Lash, who was there at the time, said that the man's face became white as a sheet. And then the
Mhm.
3-year-old said, I even know where you buried my body.
Mhm.
And so then he led a group of people, including the man that he had accused, to this pile of stones out in a field. And he said, he buried my body under the stones. And then he buried the axe over there. So they
Mhm.
dug it up, and sure enough, there's a skeleton of a man there. And he has damage in the skull that looks like an axe wound.
Mhm.
I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So at this point, the neighbor admits that yes, he did kill that man. He committed the crime.
Mhm.
Then they did, because I mean, how could he not in this situation? It's just
Yeah.
crazy. So he admits it, and then they go to where the boy says the murder weapon was buried, and they go and they find it. It was exactly where it was buried.
Mhm.
Apparently, the doctor wanted to know what would happen to this murderer. And this is, some of this is just kind of lore, so we don't know totally what happened.
Mhm.
Part of this story has been told and documented, and some of it isn't. Um, he was not turned over to the police. The murderer wasn't. What actually happened to him was not reported, but they said that the little boy um, told the people in the community what his punishment should be, and they took care of the punishment, which is just really interesting.
Mhm.
The thing is, if this was the only story like that, you'd go, maybe, I don't know, and how much was
Right.
he coached and, all that kind of stuff. But it's not even close to the only
Oh,
story out there. There are tons more.
right. Well, Dr. Ian Stevenson was a professor at the University of Virginia and
Yeah.
had a whole team of researchers there researching this past life phenomena. And they were traveling a lot to the Middle East because there is, in India, because there is a greater belief of reincarnation there. And so
Yeah.
these stories were more prevalent, mostly because, I mean, this happens all the time with, whatever families, but there, when these stories start coming out of children, they're believed and revered and researched. So
Right.
if this is sounding curious to you guys, I highly recommend that you go to Amazon and check out Ian Stevenson. He has passed, but he has an enormous body of work and many books about children and past lives that are phenomenal. In
Yeah.
fact, when I first started studying to be a past life regressionist, Dr. Ian Stevenson's work had a huge effect on me.
Hmm.
Really interesting stuff.
Super interesting, and so much of it just undeniable.
Mhm,
I mean, how would a small child know any of those things?
mhm,
When you're 3, I mean, you talk about an older kid, maybe they could have picked it up from somewhere, but a 3-year-old child, they're not gonna just pick up this information from someone, that
right, yeah.
so, we were just gonna kinda take turns telling some stories that we've learned.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
what have you got for us?
I have another solved crime from a past
Okay.
life memory. This was a little boy in Turkey. His name was Semi Tutsmus, and he was born with a serious deformity on his right ear.
Mm,
Just for no reason, but his right ear was seriously deformed. And when he was 2, nearly 3, he started talking about the fact that he was shot in the ear, shot in the side of his head on the right side by a man called Isa Derbakil.
mhm.
And Semi was able to tell his parents what his name was in his past life. It was Salim Fesley. And he gave them the names of his wife and 6 children.
Oh my
And from
goodness.
the time that he was 2 until 4, he was constantly asking for his wife, talking about his children, wondering where they were, how they were doing, talking about that ear and how, he knows why it's like that. And so when he was 4, he was taken to a village that he had mentioned lots of times, and by his parents, and I believe by some researchers. And they went to his a house. They went to a village, and he took them straight to the house that he'd lived in during his past life. He introduced himself to his family, including his wife,
Wow.
and yeah, and he saw Isa, and he freaked out, started screaming at him and throwing rocks at him. So this little 4-year-old kid sees this grown adult and starts screaming at him, throwing rocks at him, and telling people that this is the man who killed me.
Wow.
And it upset and shook Isa up so much that he admitted to the crime and said it was an accident, and but that he did cover up the crime because he didn't want to be, in trouble for it. He didn't want to claim it. He actually
Mhm.
went to jail for 2 years for that crime.
Wow.
And then our little kiddo and his family go back home, and he stayed in contact with his wife and his children, and continued to have a relationship with them, to some capacity, as he was growing up. It's a very interesting story.
Wow. That is.
But again, yeah, isn't that interesting to think that a murderer might not only have to cover up the you know being caught in this life, or maybe they'll be caught in this life by the reincarnation of the person they killed.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, very. Just something to think about a little bit about, maybe things aren't as cut and dried and black and white and
Hmm.
time and, maybe things aren't as sure as we think they are.
Yeah,
Very interesting.
yeah.
Well, there are so many stories, but
Hmm.
this one I think is really interesting. I've read about this kid before. So this child was born in Seattle, and he knew at 2 that he was the 4th reincarnation of the original Tibetan Lama, which is, Lama is a Tibetan word for guru, Daesung Rinpoche the first. So he was the 4th reincarnation of that original Lama. So there'd been a lot of signs around this child's birth, and of course that's a belief in Tibetan Buddhism that the lamas do come back repeatedly.
Hmm.
And Denzin Rinpoche III had told his acolytes in 1987, which is the year that he died, was that he would be reborn in Seattle. And
Hmm.
so this little boy was born in 1991. His name was, or is, Sonam Wangdu, which of course I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly or not. Um, but he had visions of his mother. All he just had all of these things that he was sure. And
Hmm.
his parents became very sure as well. In 1996, he was only answering to the name Trukula, which means reincarnation, and he left his family forever to be raised in Tibet, in Kathmandu, actually, sorry, in Nepal, in
Mm.
Kathmandu, to be raised by the monks while studying Tibetan Buddhism.
Wow.
And he did eventually become the head of the monastery there. And let's see, he's still there, as far as I can tell, and
Hmm.
is still leading and teaching, and fully believes himself to be the reincarnation of Denzin Rinpoche. So
Wow.
he would be now the 4th. But I mean, you got to think, and I suspect that his parents were probably Buddhist. Although in the picture, the boy looks like he's a white kid.
Hmm.
Um, but can you imagine being in Seattle and your child at 2 starting to, talk
Yeah.
about that he knows who he is and he's this Tibetan Lama? This is just really interesting.
Hmm.
Like, there's not a lot of crossover
Right.
culturally, and it's possible there is. It doesn't say if his parents were Tibetan Buddhists, and they
Hmm.
certainly could have been. but, it's not as though he was, like, born in Nepal or Tibet or, in that same culture. He was definitely born very far from all of that,
Mhm.
but knew at 2 that that's who he was, and he was so convinced that at 6, his parents let him go to go and be
Mhm.
trained.
Wow.
Wild.
That is really wild. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I have a story of a little guy who turned out to have some pretty phenomenal memories. So his mother's name is Kathy Bird. Are from Los Angeles, and she had a little boy who, from the time he was born, was just, from the time he was could walk, he was absolutely into baseball in a
Mhm.
big way, and neither of his parents were baseball people at all. But
Mm.
this little one couldn't get enough of baseball. Every time they went into a store, he wanted a ball, he wanted a this, he wanted a that. So by the time he was 2 and a half, he had little teeny cleats, and he had a bat, and he had a ball, and a mitt, and it was all he wanted to do was play ball all the time. Well, they had taken a trip to Boston, and they went to Fenway Park. Some friends of theirs had tickets to a game, and so they got to go. And when they were walking through the on their way to their seats, into the park,
Mhm.
there is an enormous picture there of Babe Ruth. And when he saw that picture, he got really, really upset and pissed off and was screaming and yelling that I hate him. I don't like him. He's mean to me. He's a bad man. And they were like, "What the hell?" They didn't even know who Babe Ruth was. I mean, because these people didn't do baseball. The reason they went to Fenway Park is because this kid was so into baseball.
Mhm.
Anyway, he was so upset they left. They didn't even go to the game.
Oh my gosh.
They got back to LA, and he started saying things to his mom like, "When I was tall like daddy, I was a baseball player." And she's like, "Okay." And so she would ask him questions like, "Oh, did you fly on airplanes?" And he would say, "No, I went on trains." So she's thinking, "This is interesting." Uh, a very strict Christian family that did not believe in past lives or reincarnation. And
Mhm.
so these stories spilling out of this kid were really confusing to her,
Mhm.
and upsetting, but really fascinating, And so they've been careful to not like shut him down because it was just wild what was coming out of him.
Mhm.
One thing that he did all the time that she thought was so weird is he would sit on the couch with the dog's bone and rub it on his bat all the time.
Mm.
And she always thought that was the weirdest thing and wondered why he was doing that, but he used to do that all the time.
Mhm.
Anyway, he also would nag everyone to constantly pitch to him so he could bat. And so they spent all the time in the backyard with this little teeny kid batting and pitching balls
Mhm.
to him. So he had started by the time he was 3, at bedtime, a lot of times he would talk about the olden days when he was a baseball player,
Mm.
and he would often tell them, about Babe Ruth, that he was not a nice man, that, he was a bad guy, that he didn't
Mhm.
like Babe Ruth, and again, she was just, taking notes and listening to what he had to say, and he would tell them about specific games when the Dodgers played in New York, and he said that they had to play during the day back then because they didn't have lights on their fields. This is a 3-year-old
Oh, wow.
saying this stuff that
Right.
makes no sense. So she
And
finally
that he
starts
would know that they traveled by train and not by plane.
so she starts Googling a little bit, trying to figure out who could he possibly be
Yeah.
referring to. So she learned some interesting things. One of the things she learned is that they used to keep cow femurs in the dugout for the players to rub on their bats because they believed it to break their bats in and condition them. So he'd been rubbing the dog's bone on his bat all that time because that's what they used to do.
Oh my gosh.
So many things that he told them turned out to be historically accurate. And
Mhm.
so she finally reached out to a past life regressionist for some help with a woman named Carol Bowman, who specializes in child past
Oh,
life
yeah,
memories.
yeah.
Yeah. And so Carol had suggested that they get some pictures going, find some pictures of baseball players in Babe Ruth's time and see if we could help this kid identify who he's talking about. So she shows him a picture of a man with big dimples from 1927, the 1927 Yankees, and he says, "That's me." Turns out that was Lou Gehrig.
Wow.
And in doing more research, she discovered that Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth had a very well documented feud, that they'd been good friends and had a falling out and hated each other.
Wow. I had no
It's pretty
idea.
interesting. When she showed him a picture of Lou Gehrig's parents, he knew them by name and also pointed to the mother and said, "That's you, you know." Which, no, she did not know, but she was pretty surprised.
Mhm.
So this one is an interesting to me because she felt so guilty about the whole thing because of her religion
Mhm.
and felt like she couldn't not listen to her child, but at the same time, it didn't make any sense to her.
Mhm.
That she almost felt like this was a sin, what was happening here. And she did a big research project herself into the history of religion and the Bible surrounding the idea of preexistence and rebirth,
Mhm.
and discovered that there was a time when the Bible did contain information about past lives and reincarnation, and it was
Mhm.
scrubbed from the Bible during Constantine the Great's era.
Right.
And that, in fact, that became a forbidden topic that people could be jailed for even discussing.
Mhm.
So I didn't know that. I felt like that was interesting
Lots of
information.
stuff got removed from the Bible by Constantine,
Yeah.
and a lot of the way that interpretation
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
Bible was changed during Constantine, because Constantine was all about being able to use the Bible to control its people.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah. So anyway, that helped her to resolve her, feelings around that. But
Mhm.
at any rate, pretty interesting. So she did finally decided to have a past life regression herself.
Mhm.
And she did a past life regression that lasted a 3 hour hypnosis session, which is
Oh
so
my
wild.
goodness.
I can't imagine doing a past life regression that lasts that long.
Oh yeah.
I can't imagine how tired you would be. But at any rate, in listening to the tapes, she spoke in the first person as Lou Gehrig's mother,
Oh
Christina.
my gosh.
And she described many scenes from her life and situations from her life that proved to be historically accurate. So, at any rate, she and her son obviously came back together
Mhm.
as mother and son again. Pretty interesting.
Very interesting. Wow.
So, one of the stories she told was about a specific piece of jewelry, and that she had wanted to give that piece of jewelry to a family member after she died. And she was able to find that family through the National Baseball Hall of Fame through their documentation.
Oh wow.
And when she contacted them, she found out that they did indeed inherit that piece of jewelry. It was something she'd been worried about, that maybe they didn't receive it, but as it turned out, they did. But that was one piece of like evidence that really shocked people, because very few people would have actually known about that.
Sure.
That piece of jewelry. Anyway, I mean, their family had that piece of jewelry for 60 years. She'd been dead for 60 years when she had this past life regression. Christina
Wow.
Gehrig had been dead for 60 years.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just a very interesting story,
Mhm.
and I personally have no doubt. If you're interested in that story, there's a book called The Boy Who Knew Too Much by Kathy Bird
Mhm.
that you could check out if you're interested in getting more info on that story. But I just love that one. I thought that was a really sweet one, and
Yeah.
loved that maybe Lou Gehrig gets a second chance to, you know, not have ALS this time.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no kidding.
yeah, had a little more time to do what he wants to do.
Mhm. Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
Amazing to know those kinds of things. I mean, you just can't deny that a little boy would not know.
any
A
of
little child
that.
like that would not know.
Yeah.
Well, I have another interesting one. Vladimir Levinsky, who must have changed his name, but he was originally born as David Seacombe in England in the 1930s, was born with an innate gift for playing the piano. And he actually just taught himself to be a concert pianist, which he did not take lessons. He actually refused to take lessons and said, I have no time for them. I have a technique of my own. Can you imagine being a child teaching yourself to play the piano and I don't need lessons?
Mhm,
It was like he was remembering.
mhm,
He, as a young child, recognized himself as the reincarnation of Franz Liszt. Liszt was a German composer and pianist, very famous.
mhm.
And by the time, Vladimir Levinsky was 21, he was, like, performing for packed concert halls and,
Mhm.
super, super popular, but he was really obsessed with Liszt and his connection to Liszt,
Mhm.
and it kind of got in his way, like, sometimes during a concert, he would stop playing so that he could talk about Liszt and talk about his connection to Liszt instead of just playing, and it got kind of became a mental health issue for him, it sounds like,
Mhm.
because he was so sure that that's who he was. But he was literally just born with the ability to, play the piano that well, and like Liszt did. And, a
Wow.
lot of people didn't understand what he was talking about or how that could be, and so that became a hindrance for him. But,
Mhm.
he had no doubt at all that that's
Wow.
exactly who he was.
Yeah. I've wondered that so many times about various kids who have skills well beyond their, age,
Yeah.
well beyond the skill set that they should have,
Mhm.
if they just brought them in from another life.
Yeah. And for what reason, which we don't totally know what reason, sometimes, people come in with those memories and, most of the time we don't. But
Yeah.
occasionally and it's very possible that we all do to some extent as young children, but it gets
Mhm.
squashed.
Mhm.
And, particularly in Western culture where that isn't so much a belief,
Sure.
I can see how could be quashed because one of the things the researchers have figured out is that kids kind of remember things between like 2 or 3 to age 6 or so.
Uh-huh.
If it's not supported and documented as they get older, they will forget because we forget our early
Mhm.
childhood. We don't really actually have conscious memory of those years, and so then we lose that information.
Mhm.
So it
It's kinda
is
like
generally
having a
through.
dream and waking up from that dream, and
Yeah,
it might be very vivid for a minute, but then it just slips
but then
away.
it isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So having parents that encourage it and understand it and, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah. I
that certainly helps.
Oh, definitely. Well, as you know, I've had a couple of experiences with my youngest daughter that,
Yeah.
have, always blown me away. First of which is that when she was really little, from the time she was 2-ish, for a while, every so often, she would get extremely scared about a volcano, and
Yes.
she would cry and cry and cry that the volcano, we're going to die, it's the volcano, and know that we don't live that far from the Yellowstone supervolcano.
No, not that
And
far at all.
so and anytime anyone talked about Yellowstone and the volcano there, she would get really upset. Basically, I had to threaten everyone around us, "Talk to this kid about volcanoes, and I will have to murder you. So don't
Yeah.
don't talk to her about volcanoes,"
Yeah.
because we would have multiple sleepless nights with her absolutely terrified, and I finally realized this is a past life thing.
Yeah.
It's a past life thing, and the more I talk to her about it, the more I'm convinced that it was Mount Vesuvius that she actually
Uh-huh.
experienced. It wasn't the Yellowstone volcano, but I do believe that she died in a volcanic, eruption, in showing her pictures and talking to her about that area, that became pretty clear to me that it was Mount Vesuvius or something else, with a relatable story because that
Mhm.
was something that came up for me, but the other one was that when she was 5, we went to Salmon, Idaho, to the Sacagawea Discovery Center,
Yeah.
and that's a really cool place, and it's a big walking tour, and you walk
Yeah.
through all these different kinds of, displays and things showing you how Sacagawea lived and, various things about Lewis and Clark and their expedition. And we're walking through there hand in hand, and she just stops and she looks up at me and she goes, "You were her." And I said, "I was who?" And she said, "You were Sacagawea." Just deadpan. And I'm like, "What you talking about?" And she goes, "Mom, you're Sacagawea. Don't you know?" And that was it. And then we just went on our way. But
Yeah.
that would always really grab me too because of my own draw to that heritage.
Yeah.
But anyway, and many other things with her, but those are two that really jump out at me right now as ones that blew my mind. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was all when she was really little, and
Uh-huh.
she doesn't really talk about any of that stuff now.
No, but at the time, it wasn't like her countenance would change, her demeanor would change, her speech became more clear than maybe a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old. I mean, she would pierce your soul,
Yeah.
with the clarity of the way she was talking to you, like
Mhm.
adult to adult, face to face, not a little kid talking, but more like an adult talking. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was very, very interesting.
Mhm.
But I think it's something that, we've really only scratched the surface on,
Indeed. Yeah.
to fully understand. And if you're on YouTube and you want to share some stories in the chat for this
Mhm.
video in the comments, please do. We'd love to hear your
Mhm.
stories. It's very interesting. You go out
Mhm.
there into internet land and on Reddit and stuff, and there are tons of stories like this. People tell stories about their children all the time.
Oh gosh, I on TikTok just recently I saw a lady who on 9/11 she was watching some stuff about the Twin Towers,
Yes.
and her little girl said, "Oh, I died there."
Yeah.
Which is always scary for a parent to hear, right? And she was like,
Hmm.
"You what?" Anyway, she told her a very detailed story about how she was in one of the hallways and things got very dark and people were crying and jumping out windows. And this little girl couldn't have possibly known any of this,
No.
telling her all of these things. She told her what her name was, what her job was, the name of her boyfriend, the name of their dog. And this mom is actively right now searching for that family,
Yeah.
to verify this story. But this little one just deadpan explained all of this stuff to her mom, just totally out of the blue,
Yeah.
when they saw some things on TV about the Twin Towers that must have, you know,
Hmm.
piqued her memory in some way.
Must have, yeah. Really interesting. And there's, like you said, we've mentioned several of the researchers. There are a lot of books out there where they've gone out and, verified some of these stories and actually found people, found graves,
Mhm.
names, witnesses, that kind of thing that it's
Mhm.
out there. And,
Yeah.
I mean, of course there are the skeptics and people who don't believe it, but it's
Sure.
when you read the body of evidence, the body of work that's been done by some of these researchers, it's hard to deny.
It's pretty compelling stuff. It is, yeah.
Mhm.
And of course you should be skeptical. We should always
Right.
skepticism is healthy,
Mhm.
and no one should ever just believe everything just because someone else said it or just because it's on the internet. But
Right.
yeah, it's a very interesting topic. And the topic of children, solving their own murders or adults solving their own murders, it's happened more than a couple times. It's happened quite a bit. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It's
very
just very
interesting
interesting that
topic.
you would have that because often with these past life memories, one of the most vivid memories they have is how they died, that they can
Yeah.
tell you exactly how they died.
Mhm.
And so because of that, they, sometimes have been able to go back and actually solve their own murder, which is I mean, that is true crime paranormal on steroids.
Right. There it is. Mic drop. Yep.
Yeah. Most definitely. But I'm curious to
Yeah.
hear if you have stories of your own. Please share those over in YouTube on this video. We'd love to hear about it.
Yeah.
Just love it. So we have so much fun stuff coming up for you guys. We have our
Mhm.
cemetery tour coming up the second weekend in October. We're going to be doing some live streams and telling some stories and going to some really cool cemeteries and showing you some really interesting graves and headstones and stuff.
Yeah.
We're excited about that. And
Yeah.
always, if you love what we do and want to support us, you can do that by going over to Patreon and finding True Crime Paranormal over there. If you become a
Mhm.
patron, you get some free extra content with us. So we do some
Mhm.
extra shows every month that only our patrons get to see.
Yeah.
We love to share that with you. Of course, we do have a Facebook fan page and a discussion group, and they are both called True Crime Paranormal as well.
Uh-huh.
Come find us over there if you want to talk to us. We love case recommendations, particularly unsolved cases, because that's what we normally do.
Mhm.
But please feel free to share and communicate with us. We love hearing from all of you.
Mhm.
We had a really fun experience this weekend where we met a listener who has been well, I think she's actually a viewer of our show on YouTube,
Mhm.
and she lived in Florida, and she recently moved to the town where Katie lives. And we were at this
Yeah.
witch's market, and she came right up to us, and she knew exactly who we were, and she introduced
Yeah.
herself, and she said, "I just moved here from Florida, and I watch your show, and I love you guys." It was a cool experience, I got to tell you.
It's super fun. We had quite a few people that came to our booth that
Yes.
listened to us. Our kids couldn't believe it,
Yeah.
because 'cause we're just dorky old moms, right?
Right. Yeah.
My daughter was like, a lot of people here know you, and I'm like, "Well, duh."
Yeah, it's true.
That was really fun.
Yeah, and, many of you in our comments have said that you love our show and we deserve more subscribers, so you know how you can help us with that is to share our show.
Yeah.
So share on social media, pass a link on to a friend, some if you know somebody that you think would like what we do, please
Mhm.
share it.
Yes, please. We
Well,
appreciate that
it
so much.
helps us and, the more
Yeah,
subscribers we have, the more we will keep doing what we can do.
absolutely. And of course, we'll be back here on Wednesday night for a live stream. We'll
Yep.
update you on any cases that have an update. There's a small update in the Ballo case. There's whisperings that there's some big things coming in the Ballo case, but
Yeah. So we'll
they're just
see.
whisperings for now. We don't know a lot, but we know that there's some movement happening. So we're excited to see where that goes. And of course, as soon as we know, you'll know.
Yep.
But we'll keep an eye on all of our other cases as well. And you never know. If there's not much movement, maybe we'll just bring you a new case.
You never know.
We
We'll
don't
be
know
here
what
either
Wednesday
way.
night's gonna bring, but, we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yes, we will. All right. Well,
Alrighty.
thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are True Crime Paranormal, and this has been a show about reincarnation in children. So we appreciate you being here and hope that you take good care of yourselves and stay safe.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Take care.